the border between Scotland and England. There's little to mark it now, but for hundreds of years it was hotly disputed, a scene of bloody battles and countless violent skirmishes. And for centuries more, this northeast coast has played a defining role in shaping the island nation we are today. Travelling with me on this journey are our usual group of experts. Alice Roberts joins a team rebuilding Britain's earliest house, about 5,000 years older than the pyramids. Neil Oliver unravels a story of racial tension in one of our historic ports. Miranda Krestovnikov discovers how our seals are recovering from being hunted almost to extinction. And I get the chance to explore some of the most controversial ships on our coast. It's been an amazing journey so far, but there's still so much more to discover. This is the story of Coast. This leg of our journey takes us from Berwick upon Tweed south to Whitby. It's a 120-mile journey that crosses 4 major rivers and 2 distinct identities. The unspoilt north, once the ancient seat of power in England, and the industrial south, once the powerhouse of the Industrial Revolution. Now, though, the drama that has been played out in the northeast over thousands of years is rather overlooked. Welcome to a forgotten coast. This is Berwick upon Tweed. Only a stone's throw from the Scottish border, this fortress town marks the beginning of the next leg of our journey. Berwick is now the northernmost town in England, and in many ways it's overshadowed by its nearest neighbour, Edinburgh, just 50 miles away. Today it's a pretty market town, but don't be fooled by its unassuming charm. The picture book serenity of Berwick upon Tweed belies its violent past. And key to that past is its location. The River Tweed is a natural border between 2 countries, England and Scotland. And Berwick has this incredibly strategic location right at the mouth of the Tweed. It was being constantly fought over by the 2 countries. In 300 years, it changed hands 13 times, and for very good reason. Before Edward I captured it for England in 1296, Berwick was the richest and most important port in Scotland. Facing east, it was ideally placed to be at the heart of Scotland's trade with Northern Europe, exporting wool, grain and salmon. In return, the traders from Germany, Flanders and the Baltic states made Berwick a thriving cosmopolitan centre. And that prosperity made it a hugely desirable prize. Caught in a vicious battle between Englishmen and Scot, there were times when blood and ash fell here more frequently than rain. Even after the so-called Perpetual Peace in 1502, which found Berwick back in English hands, the Scots still eyed it jealously. To secure Berwick once and for all for England, Elizabeth I built these massive ramparts. They were the single most expensive project of her reign, and they cost a whopping £128,000. More money was spent here than on defending the realm against the Spanish Armada. Berwick had to be impregnable, and Elizabeth hired the finest military engineers from Italy. Behind these stone-clad walls is compacted earth intended to absorb the impact of cannon fire. And the complicated 3-dimensional geometry of the ramparts is the result of cutting-edge Renaissance mathematics. These defences serve as a reminder of just how important Berwick once was. Queen was prepared to spend fortunes on defending a town whose strategic significance has now been forgotten. Just 11 miles further down the coast is the tidal island of Lindisfarne. Long before the English and Scots did battle, another war raged, not for land, but for the very soul of the Northumbrian people. 1600 years ago, as the Roman Empire withdrew from Britain, our Christian beliefs went with it, and the forces of paganism again ruled Britain. But here, on the holy isle of Lindisfarne, 2 monks were among the first to fight back. It's impossible not to be affected by the wonderful, otherworldly atmosphere of this place. Twice every 24 hours, its doors are slammed shut, not by man, but by the forces of nature. Somehow, because of the tides, Lindisfarne now feels very remote. Yet when Irish monk Aidan, eventually to become Saint Aidan, came here, isolation was not what he wanted at all. The monks who arrived here to establish a site in AD 635 didn't come because it was a sanctuary. Aidan and his followers were on a mission that would transform Northumbria and beyond. Lindisfarne was their launch pad to convert thousands of pagan English to Christianity. Canon Kate Tristram has written extensively about the first monks on Lindisfarne.
Aidan chose this island, and actually from his point of view it was a perfect choice. It could not have been better. He didn't want to be remote. He wanted to meet as many people as possible. And at low tide, people could do what they do now, because although there was no causeway, there were hard ridges of sand, and they could come walking or riding their horses. But in those days, everybody that could travel by sea did so. It was actually safer. The near mainland was thickly wooded. The woods had dangerous wild animals in them, wolves and boars and things, and dangerous wild people. It was safer, if you could, to coast down the coast in your little boats. So we must imagine the sea out there absolutely full of little boats, all floating into the harbour at high tide.
So this island wasn't remote at all, it was on the edge of a superhighway.
Yes, absolutely, because it could be approached, you see, from either direction.
Lindisfarne's ideal position served Aidan and his monks well. Travelling on foot all over Northumbria, they worked tirelessly to convert the local pagans.
Between them, they converted a lot of England. You see, St Aidan set up this place really as a missionary training college, and he found English boys, and he trained them in his own missionary methods, and then when they grew up, they were sent out. And they went across the north of England, across the Midlands, and some of them right down into the deep south. In fact, St Wilfrid, who converted the last English kingdom to be converted, which was Sussex, was a boy trained here.
According to legend, even in death, Aidan was a potent force. The vision of his body rising to heaven is said to have inspired his most famous successor, Cuthbert, a local lad who continued Aidan's work. Recognised as a saint after his death, what was to become the most significant illuminated gospel in Britain was created for St Cuthbert's shrine. This is a facsimile copy of the Lindisfarne Gospels. The 1300-year-old original is lying in a vault in the British Library, and it's one of England's greatest national treasures. The work of just one monk, Eadfrith, the Gospels are a much venerated religious relic. Leafing through this copy, you get a real feel for the scribe who sat here on Lindisfarne creating this remarkable book. It's an astonishing work of dedication. The imagery used throughout the Gospels draws from diverse influences on the church at that time. It was seen as a powerful unifying statement then, and 1300 years later it's a potent reminder that the two saints of Lindisfarne were pivotal in bringing Christianity in England back from the brink. That the Gospel survived at all, though, is a minor miracle. Only just over 100 years after Cuthbert's death, Lindisfarne was one of the first places in the country to be attacked by Vikings. Walking along this deserted beach today, beside an empty sea, you'd never think that there'd been a time when this tiny island had been so well connected and so influential that it played a starring role in rejuvenating the Christian England that we know today. Lindisfarne's influence is far-reaching, but St Aidan and his monks didn't achieve their goal alone. They had friends in high places. Aside from the obvious, practical support was provided by the local ruler, King Oswald. Back on the mainland is his home, Bamborough, now one of the most famous castles in Britain. But as Mark Horton discovers, very little of Oswald's original castle remains.
This is one of the most iconic places on Britain's coastline, the great Norman castle of Bamborough, but we're also in the heart of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria. This castle was at its most powerful before there was even an England. During the time of the Anglo-Saxons, Angleland, as it was then known, was divided up into 7 major kingdoms, of which Northumbria was the most powerful. The 6th century kings of Northumbria chose this rock to be their capital. And what a rock! The huge basalt crag that Bamborough Castle stands on was chosen for its commanding position. Connected to the sea by a natural harbour, it was visible along the coast for miles. For the last 2 years, Graham Young has been exploring beneath its magnificent facade. Graham, I can look around to see all these lumps of masonry, but presumably these are all Norman or later.
Yes, the majority of the standing structure is the last 1,000 years, really, of the castle's history.
So where's the Saxon?
Well, under the ground. We know it's here because it's written about in documentary evidence. So we've been excavating it to try and find it. And we think we've got quite a number of Anglo-Saxon features coming up now at this level.
So all over here, where they're being scraped away, pits and post holes and so forth?
Yes, the evidence is that once we stop seeing pottery, we're getting back into the 1st millennium AD. That's our prime dating evidence, the absence of things.
So what about this wall? I presume this is a wall.
It is, yeah. I think it's a very big rubble foundation to what is a massive timber structure, probably part of the gate complex.
The first documentary evidence for a fortress here is in the year 547, and Graham's find may well date back to that time. The reason that there's so little of that Anglo-Saxon fortress left is that after pillaging Lindisfarne, the Vikings hit Bamborough. In the year 993, the original fortress was razed to the ground. But it wasn't a ruin for long. William the Conqueror's forces arrived in England in 1066, and within 50 years they had made Bamborough Castle great again. That it's in such good condition today, nearly 1,000 years later, is not quite as surprising as it first appears. This may seem to be the quintessential medieval castle, but the only really genuine bit is this Norman keep. Most of the rest was rebuilt by the 19th century industrialist Lord Armstrong as a fairy tale castle. And that's this castle's secret, because despite its outward appearance, Bamborough was last used in anger over 500 years ago. Attacked during the War of the Roses, it soon fell into ruins and has never regained its powerful status. Its final abandonment by James I reflects the decline in this area's fortunes at the beginning of the 17th century, as the political importance of the border regions ebbed away.
Just 2.5 miles off the coast at Bamborough lie the Farne Islands, between 15 and more than 20 of them depending on the tide. Rugged, exposed, and formidably bleak, for centuries these islands have been home to our largest native mammal, the grey seal. Our zoologist Miranda Krestovnikov joined the Farne Island wardens on their annual assessment of the health of the local seal population.
Our main job is to monitor, the mortality, birth and death rates of the seals which are born on the colonies.
The British coastline used to be home to hundreds of thousands of grey seals. But we've been hunting them for centuries. 100 years ago, there were as few as just 500 individuals surviving around our entire coastline. In 1914, Parliament passed the Grey Seals Protection Act, the first ever legislation to protect a mammal in this country. Hunting seals for their fur was outlawed, but many blamed the recovering seal population for the collapse in local fish stocks. In 1970, Parliament legislated again, and hunting grey seals was allowed to restart. It continued right into the 1980s until a public outcry once again put a stop to the killing. Since then, the number of seals has been closely monitored.
I mean, you could see how easy it is to get really close up to one of these things. They don't run away. It must have been easy pickings for the hunters, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, almost pathetic, these animals.
They
as
are,
you can see, I can almost come within a foot. It's not bothered. The adult is away at sea.
But doesn't that make your job easier when you're going up marking them? Presumably you can just walk up to a seal like this. It's not even bothered that we're here.
It does. This is quite a good one, I must confess. This is really easy. However, in the middle of the island where a lot of females haul out, that's where the problems start.
David and his team mark the newborn pups with a coloured dye so they know which ones they've already counted and then can estimate the number of seals on the islands.
And that doesn't harm the seal pup at all?
Not at all. Before mother comes back, we'll just retreat.
The pups only keep their white fur for about 21 days before shedding it and gaining their pristine adult coat free of David's dye.
After we've done the work, it's good to see that we haven't had much of an effect on them. And
yeah.
Actually just, they back off and actually enjoy the animals for what they are.
Yeah, beautiful.
David has recorded 367 pups so far this year, and with hundreds left to count, he estimates that the Farne Islands may be home to as many as 3,800 grey seals. Counting them on land is one thing though, but I really want to see them at their best, and there's only one way to do that.
Oh look, there's one! When you see them on land, they look so cumbersome, but underwater they're really in the element. They zip through the water like a bullet. When you look at them up close, you see those big eyes that they use to feed down the depths about 50 metres, where the light doesn't penetrate very much. And look, there's one just tugging at my fin. He's using its whiskers like our fingers to investigate. They are so inquisitive. I think they're just playing with us.
The conservation of seals is a great success story for the UK coast. Protection has seen the population recover from near extinction, and now our shores are home to nearly half the world's population of grey seals.
How magical is that?
About 10 miles due south of the Seals on the Farne Islands is the ruin of a castle that didn't get a Victorian makeover. Built in the 14th century, Dunstanburgh was an extravagant construction designed to remind locals and nobles alike of Camelot. Today, its crumbling presence still towers above the almost deserted harbour at Crasta. The fishermen may have left, but one business is still thriving. Alan Robson is carrying on his family's tradition, smoking kippers like his father and his grandfather before him.
This herring yard of ours was built in 1856. It's been a tradition for small villages to smoke fish and things to last out the winter because we hadn't the transport that we have now.
How long have you worked in the smoker yourself?
Since I left school many years ago, I did national service and then came back and straight back into the business. This was a very particular area, very rich in herring. The herring used to come in to spawn, and just before the herring spawned, they were at their best. They were very high oil content.
So what happened to them? Because they're not here now, are they?
No, well, unfortunately, just after the war, it was overfished. And then when we joined the common market, they put a ban on fishing for herrings in this area, and most of the boats had to find something else to do, so they never got back to it.
So where do you get your herrings from for the smokery?
Unfortunately now, most of our herring comes from Norway and Iceland. We get the herring, defrost them, then they go onto a machine which splits the herring and cleans them. And then from there they go down into the smokehouse. They're put up into the racks above. One chap stops down below and hands them up, and the other one is there hanging onto the racks. They're traditionally smoked just with whitewood shavings and oak sawdust. We don't use any chemicals to colour.
So you literally strike a match and light the wood chips?
That's right, yes, and as it burns back onto the sawdust, you get the smoke. It takes about maybe 3 hours, 3.5 hours for the fires to burn. You renew them, and possibly after about 3 sets of fires, the kippers are ready to come out. They go in as herring and come out as kippers.
And how does the process that you use differ from the ones that your grandfather used?
No way at all, except the machine for splitting the herring. My grandfather's days, the girls used to split them by hand, and now we have a machine that does the splitting, but everything else is exactly done the same way.
Long before people were smoking fish, or even building castles here, there's evidence to suggest that Howick, just 1.5 miles from Crasta, is where we, as people, started building homes. Two years ago, a rambler stumbled over some fragments of flint sticking out of the cliff edge, and that discovery led a team of archaeologists to unearth the remains of a wooden house. Painstaking work led them to believe that the remains were part of a Stone Age settlement. Now the same archaeologists, joined by Alice Roberts, are back to test their theory and recreate what they believe is Britain's first house.
This project is something really special to me. The chance to recreate a Stone Age structure on its original site from 10,000 years ago. Discovering how to rebuild the house should give us an insight into an ancient world, which is otherwise pretty hard to imagine. After more than 2 years of research, Dr. Clive Waddington believes that this house will change our understanding of how Stone Age hunter-gatherers lived.
And this is actually the earliest evidence we have so far of a dwelling structure in this part of Britain. So it's the earliest evidence we have for human beings here as well.
Why are you recreating it?
First of all, it's experimental. It's allowing us an opportunity to try and understand what we excavated out of the ground and put that into practice, if you like, to see what it looks like as a built structure and whether it works.
Yeah.
And so what we're really doing is testing our interpretation of the excavated evidence.
Yeah, it's just the base of it.
That looks better.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot better.
Oh, and yeah.
So, Clive, how do you know that the structure was like this?
Well, when we were excavating, we found charred circles in the ground, which were basically where the post had stood.
Right.
And on the outside of the hut, just around the edge, we found these stake holes that were angled in towards the apex of the roof, and we can measure out from the angles of those stake holes and work out what the pitch was. And basically, they were around 65 degrees, which meant a really steep roof like this.
I'm beginning to get a better idea of how the house might have been constructed, but I still don't really have a picture of what the area around the house was like. By extracting core samples from the soil, it's possible to get remarkably detailed information about the environmental conditions from thousands of years ago. So you take out a metre at a time?
We try to. The upper parts of the core here are actually quite stiff, so we might not get down a metre in one go. In fact, we'll see how far we can get.
Think of this like a time machine. The deeper down we go, the further back in time we travel.
I suspect we might see evidence of some Victorian engineering here, just coming in some
This is a Victorian path.
It could well be, yeah.
By analysing the plant remains, pollen and tiny organisms contained within the layers of sediment, we can build up a detailed picture of how the landscape has changed over thousands of years.
We're definitely in the water table, wouldn't you say?
Definitely.
That's a big piece of very old wood.
And it's what, 6,000 years old?
Yep, looks quite fresh though, doesn't it?
It does, it's amazing. The sediment at about 8 metres reveals that 10,000 years ago the vegetation in this area was recovering from the last ice age. Using information from the core samples and from his excavation, Clive has begun to build a picture of the world that our Stone Age ancestors lived in.
We reckon that the sea was up to 15 metres lower than it is today, which would mean the sea was about a kilometre further out.
Yeah. So would our hut have been visible in the same way it is today?
I think so, because the land would have shelled off very gradually. The line of hills that we're stood on, these cliff edges, would have been the first hills you would have seen if you'd been approaching the area from the sea.
Yeah.
And sat on top of that would have been the hut, and that would have been visible from quite a distance out.
And why do you think they chose this particular area?
Well, I think there's many reasons, but probably the key to it is just understanding that it's situated on the cusp. It's on the cusp between different environmental zones. So out to sea, you've got all the marine life, which attract birds as well. But in addition to that, you've also got the foreshore, and in amongst there, you've got shellfish, basking seals, all this kind of stuff. And then inland, in amongst all that woodland, you would have had a large number of different types of animals.
It sounds idyllic, doesn't it, for hunter-gatherers? It's like they've positioned themselves in a natural larder. I'm really beginning to build up a picture of what this area must have been like 10,000 years ago, how sophisticated the construction of the house is, and the teamwork involved in building it. There's this sort of idea about Stone Age people being pretty backwards, living in caves, Flintstones.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they're people, and they're no lesser intelligent than we are. They just had different technology available to them.
Yeah.
And in many ways, it might have been more ingenious because they were living more on the edge than we do.
There's all these skills that we've lost because we're not doing this anymore.
I mean, making the strings for a start.
Yeah. This is a really robust construction and stands in stark contrast to the traditional idea of Mesolithic people building only temporary and relatively flimsy shelters, like the one found at Goats Crag 10 miles inland. Archaeological excavations have shown that in the Mesolithic people were using this rock shelter as a temporary camp, but the thing which brings me closest to these people is the art. There are some images of animals. They're pretty crude, I'll give you, but it does, for me, just strip away that 10,000 years. That's wonderful. Despite the worsening weather, the house is really coming together. And although the archaeological evidence isn't clear on what the roof was made of, this spider's web of birch twigs and hazel is so strong that it's likely it was designed to support something heavy, like turf. Finally, the weather turned against us, but we'd come so far there was no stopping us now. With the build complete, Clive has one more piece of evidence that points to this being a permanent dwelling for Stone Age hunter-gatherers.
We found a series of hearths in the centre of the building.
Yeah.
And there was a succession of them with the latest ones at the top and the earliest ones at the bottom.
Right.
And we found hazelnuts inside each of these hearths. And the great thing about hazelnuts is that they only live for 1 year, of course. And so we did all our carbon dates on hazelnuts, and they've allowed us to date the different phases of occupation and for how long the hut was occupied for.
So what was the answer? How long do you think it was occupied?
The hut was occupied for somewhere in the region of 200 years. Several generations, you know, many lifetimes, in fact.
Mm. And it's that makes this house so special. The proof that it was occupied for over 200 years has forced people to revise their theories about our Stone Age ancestors 10,000 years ago. Rather than being nomadic, as was previously believed, these Mesolithic people were building complex houses like this one and calling them home.
South of Howick, the nature of the coast begins to change. It doesn't look like it, but this beautiful stretch of Druridge Bay marks the beginning of the heart and soul of our industrial heritage. For the next 45 miles along to Hartlepool, industry and engineering shape the face of this coast. Just out there, some 80 metres below the seabed, is a tunnel. It used to be part of a coal mining that stretched for 8 miles out to sea. On a quiet day, the miners could hear ships passing overhead. Well, that mine's closed now, so all the other deep pits that fueled the industrial boom of the northeast coast. Coal fueled the factories, the steelworks, the trains, the shipyards and the ships. Coal brought prosperity and pride to all the great cities of the northeast. That coal was created 300 million years ago. Back then it would have looked a little different around here. For a start, would have been on the equator, and all this would have been tropical rainforest. Over 300 million years, the continents moved. The trees fell and were transformed by the immense heat and pressure of geological forces. And the result is this. Out there, the coal seams rise right up to the seabed, where the incredible pounding and sucking of the water breaks the coal up and washes it ashore. Here for the taking. This whole stretch of coast thrived on the coal. For well over 150 years, jobs were plentiful, and places like Whitby Bay grew into bustling holiday destinations for the local miners. Today, it's surviving without the coal, as the stag and hen party capital of the northeast. But while the black stuff was coming out of the ground, everywhere along this coast had a role to play. The River Tyne was a major artery for transporting coal to the rest of England and out to Europe. This stretch of water has seen centuries of passing traffic. 800 years ago, small boats from here were coasting down to the Thames laden with coal for the capital. And by 1900, South Shields, over at the mouth of the Tyne there, had become a booming port. And like prosperous ports the world over, it was a multicultural melting pot. Historian Neil Oliver takes a trip back in time to uncover one of the largely forgotten stories of this historic port.
When you come to a new place, one of the best ways to find out what's going on is to look at the local paper. And it's the same with history. The archives of the local rag are fantastic time capsules for attitudes and events. This is an extract from the South Shields Gazette from the 16th of April, 1913. The suggestion, which has come from more than one prosecution recently heard by the South Shields magistrates, that an Arab colony is materialising in our midst, in Holborn to be precise, is exciting some attention, and not undeservedly so. British ports attracted seamen of many nationalities from right across the empire, but many of the Arabs in South Shields mentioned in the Gazette came from Aden, an important port in the Middle Eastern country of Yemen. Aden was occupied by the British in 1839, and 30 years later, with the opening of the Suez Canal, became a vital staging post on the journey between the UK and India. From as early as 1894, there are records of a few Yemeni seamen living in South Shields, but they didn't come in their numbers until the First World War. Drawn by incentives from the government, they were encouraged to South Shields to make up for the chronic lack of local men who were away, fighting in the trenches. Between 1914 and 1918, the population of Yemenis rose from a few dozen to over 3,000. After the war, Mill Dam was the epicentre of a sailor's onshore life. Norman Ahmed's father was one of the thousands of Yemenis who came here every day. Norman, can you give me a sense of what this place was like, you know, when your dad was working here?
Yes, well, it would be thriving. Here at the Federation office, where men were signing on and paying off, there was Frankie the note cracker. He was the one who used to cash your advance note, and he took 2 shillings in the pound. He must have had a load. He must have been a very rich man. But we never had any reason to go to him, because with being within the Arab community, we used to borrow off each other rather than go that way. It was a busy, lively thoroughfare. The river full of ships, you know. It seems oh so dead now, oh so dead. This is a picture of my father and my mum when they were
Wow,
married.
how dapper is he?
Yes, he's very dapper.
And they're married there?
Yeah.
They don't look old enough to be married, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Despite being encouraged here by the government, many of the Arab seamen struggled for somewhere to live. The local boarding house owners often refused them lodging, so they began to open up their own in an area close to Mill Dam called Holborn. These aren't really the parts of town that people get sentimental about, so it's not really surprising that, you know, the streets and shops and houses in these photographs have just about all gone. But in 1918, these streets were full of life. For local men returning from the war, it was a shock to discover Arabs taking their jobs. But that wasn't the worst of it. You can actually track the simmering discontent through the letters pages in the local papers. There's some real heartfelt grudges coming to the fore. Look at this. Furthermore, the Arabs can always be relied upon to pick the prettiest girls, the ugly ducklings being left for the white man. Also, an Arab can get a job where a white man has not a look in. They refuse to sell themselves so cheaply. And those tensions surfaced in February 1919 when white and Arab sailors clashed. As Britain slid towards the Great Depression, jobs became scarce and relationships between the two communities began to disintegrate. But it was on the 2nd of August 1930 that it all kicked off, right here. Jim Slater was here 75 years ago as a reporter for the South Shields Gazette. He's 94 now, but remembers clearly the events of the day.
Went down there at about 9:30. Saturday, mark you, bank holiday, and by the time I got there, I was stopped. They wouldn't let me go down to the Mill Dam, but until I showed me NUJ card, and the police said, go all right, but no further than the post office. And at that time, it hadn't quite started as it was going to do eventually.
The powder keg was ignited when 2 white sailors were given jobs on one of the few ships still working. The sailors were offered a police escort through the threatening crowd, but one of the men refused.
this particular man, he was quite a burly individual, a big 6-footer and well built. And he wasn't going to have any police protection. He would go there where he wanted to go, as he had a right to do. And he was no doubt pushed and shoved, and he would try to shove his way through. A shove started a blow, and a blow started a fight, and then it just escalated. There was no hesitation by the police. They had their buttons out, and then they started to run, and that started it. And they all ran away, and all I could see was the bodies lying down, Arabs as well as police. To say it was shattered, we put it mildly. I never expected happening that. But, you know, when I saw the aftermath, I was both horrified and disgusted, really, that it should have happened.
4 policemen were stabbed and many more people, both white and Arab, were injured. Only 10 days later, 6 white men and 20 Yemeni sailors found themselves in court, charged with affray and causing a riot. 15 of the Yemeni men were sentenced to deportation after serving time in prison. The Mill Dam riots have been described as Britain's first race riot, but, as always, things are not exactly as the headlines might suggest. By 1930, there were too many sailors here and not enough jobs. Now, in any community, that was a situation that had to come to a head. This isn't just a story about race. I think this is a story about poverty and desperation, and it's about the ends that people, any people, will go to if they're driven hard enough. The ill feeling generated by the riot could have spelt the end for the Arab community in South Shields, but many had made their home here, married local women, and begun to have children. Today, the children of those first seamen live here with their children, and the traditions and cultures that they brought with them survive.
The bit which I rather like as a conclusion is the fact that when war was declared in this last war, they went to the sea and sailed in the same ships as the British men, taking the same risks and dying, unfortunately, the same death.
From the mouth of the Tyne, it's just 8 miles south to Sunderland and its river, the Wear. This river was once lined with shipyards. In 1834, the yards on the Wear produced nearly as many ships as all the other shipyards in Britain put together. In fact, Sunderland was the largest shipbuilding town in the world. The yards in Sunderland went from strength to strength, producing 1.5 million tonnes of shipping for the Second World War. Shipbuilding was the lifeblood of Sunderland's prosperity and defined the very identity of the town and its people. Generations of families worked here, at Doxford Pallion. It's not until you walk around a derelict shipyard that you get a real sense of the loss. There's more than economics and jobs to shipbuilding. It's been part of our culture for thousands of years. And as islanders, we no longer have the wherewithal to build our own vessels, to leave our own shores. By the 1950s, orders for ships were falling as competitors abroad built faster and cheaper. Using mass production techniques, Japanese and Korean yards turned out ships by their hundreds, while Sunderland was still crafting bespoke but expensive one-offs. And that lack of competitiveness told. During the 60s and 70s, Sunderland shipyards closed one by one. This is where 600 years of shipbuilding on the Wear ended on the 12th of December 1988. On that night, the last ship built in Sunderland was launched from here. A modest ferry, the Superflex November. Today, nobody builds ships on the banks of the Wear, and most of the ships that were built here during that final decade have joined a growing fleet of vessels that are reaching the end of their working lives. Now, the issue facing this coast and others like it around the world is not one of shipbuilding, but of shipbreaking. Sounds simple enough. Use the disused shipbuilding infrastructure to offer a lifeline to local heavy industry. But just 20 miles south of Sunderland, in Hartlepool, people are beginning to discover just how difficult and dangerous shipbreaking can be. Sailing into the Tees estuary, the sight of 4 rusting American warships is absolutely startling. And with the image of this area's triumphant shipbuilding past still clear in my mind, it's sobering to be confronted by ships at the end of their life. These 4 are just the tip of the iceberg. 4,000 miles away on the James River in Virginia, there are more than 60 in the Cold War Ghost Fleet, just rusting away. The ghost ships were towed into Hartlepool on a tide of protest. There were, and there still are, environmental concerns about the impact of breaking ships on this part of the coast. Environmental campaigners need only point to shipbreaking operations in the developing world to show how disastrous they can be. Globally, 600 ships are broken every year. 90% of them in Bangladesh, China, Pakistan, India and Turkey, and often without any consideration to the environment or to the workers doing the breaking. By 2010, it's estimated that the number of ships needing to be scrapped every year will rise to 3,000. Many people, me included, believed that breaking ships in docks like the one in Hartlepool was a much better option than dumping our rusting fleet on somebody else's beaches. In July 2003, Able UK won the contract to decommission 13 of the American Ghost Fleet, and the first 4 arrived in Hartlepool 4 months later. But work on them never began. Mired in legal wrangling, their fate now rests on an environmental impact assessment from the government. What a mess! To think that this rust bucket was once part of one of the world's elite navies. Even though I've heard a lot about these ships, nothing has prepared me for what it actually feels like to be aboard these rotting hulks. Able UK won the contract from the US Marine Administration by proposing a method of dismantling and recycling the ships in a specially constructed dry dock. So once you've got them here, why do you think various environmental groups disagreed?
We don't honestly know. A lot of people come up to me and shake hands and say, it's terrible what Greenpeace are doing to you, Peter. And they're not. People have got it wrong. Greenpeace have been supportive. What we're doing is the type of, we provide the type of facility and type of shipbreaking methods that Greenpeace want to see undertaken. It's Friends of the Earth have been the only activist organisation that's been opposed to this.
Friends of the Earth maintain that these ships, and the other 9 that Able UK are contracted to dismantle here, are toxic.
Well, they shouldn't be called toxic ships. It's a misuse of the terminology regarding these ships. There is potentially hazardous waste on these ships. For instance, this in here is insulation that could be contaminated with asbestos. What we'll do is take tests, and if there's asbestos found, then we'll definitely treat all this area as asbestos.
And have you used this technique before? Remove asbestos from a confined area like this?
Yeah, I've been doing asbestos for over 30 years.
But Friends of the Earth are even more concerned about a group of chemicals called PCBs. Now banned, they're known to be carcinogenic.
a lot of the cable we really use, but the particular cable that's caused some concern, being suggested PCBs, is this cable over here. See the larger cables here? What's been suggested, people have calculated the total weight of all of these cables on the ships, say about 150 tonne, and then they've said that there's 150 tonne of PCBs on the ship, but that's absolutely, totally wrong.
PCBs were used as an insulator in power cables, but only make up a small percentage of their total weight. These ships do, however, contain huge quantities of old engine oil, a serious and well understood threat to the environment.
So this is a typical type of machinery and motors that has oil in them. There's gearbox oil and there's engine oil in them. That oil is removed before we do the decommissioning in the dry dock, so that if there was a spillage, it's still in a contained area, so we just have to mop it up. Yes, that's like one of the machines.
Peter confidently talks about dismantling these ships in the dry dock, but even that's controversial. The dry dock hasn't been built yet and doesn't even have planning permission. The situation is complicated further by the location. The ghost ships and the dry dock that Able UK want to build are right next to the Seal Sands site of special scientific interest.
It is an amazing jewel in the crown. It's surrounded by industry. Industry that had cleaned up a large amount over the last 10 or 15 years, and the River Tees is now cleaner than it has been for decades. It's an important wildlife site for feeding birds, especially at winter time. Very large populations of knot and plover and redshanks, and it's an important area in terms of some of the invertebrates within the mud, and of course it's famous for the seals.
So what would the effects be on this estuary of shipbreaking?
There'll be a number of effects, but the most important one, I think, is that the company wants to dredge the river to allow it to bring in big ships for scrapping. And that dredging could completely destroy the wildlife site. If you dredge the river, the mudflats can collapse. The mud from would slip into the river, be dredged out, and there would be no feeding ground for the birds.
In sending their rotting naval ships to be broken clinically here in the UK, weren't both Americans and British trying to do the right thing?
Well, they were doing the right thing in terms of not sending them to the developed world to get trashed, absolutely. But doing the proper right thing, if you like, would be for America to deal with them in their own shipyard.
The only thing that Friends of the Earth and Able agree on is that these ships should be broken up safely and with strict environmental controls. After 2 years of fighting, positions have become entrenched. Able UK are very clear where they stand.
If we don't get permission to do them here, which would be really shame for the area because there's lots of potential for jobs for the next 30 years, we believe. But if we didn't get permission here, then we will do exactly the same techniques in another dry dock somewhere else in the world.
It seems that there's no perfect solution to this problem. Ships in ever-increasing numbers will have to be broken up. Whichever way the environmental impact assessment goes, some will lose out. But as in the decision to stop shipbuilding here in the first place, it's the coast that will feel the impact for generations after the decision is made. While much of this coast is struggling to come to terms with its industrial legacy, just 7 miles from Hartlepool, the beach at Redcar is alive with activity. And although it's about as far as I can imagine from Maui, Bondi or even Newquay, it's becoming a mecca for a new sport that's sweeping the coast.
My name's David Bitson and I'm a kite surfer. 22, southwesterly, perfect. It's probably the fastest growing water sport since it started in France. It's come across the shores into the UK. Redcar's a really good spot to kite surf because it's got big, wide, empty beaches, no groins. It's pretty windy most of the time. We're in the middle of summer here and we've got sort of 25-mile-an-hour winds, which is quite unusual. And the water is getting really, really good now. It used to be pretty polluted from the River Tees, but it's improving all the time. We're getting porpoises and fish jumping around now, which is always good to see. You can get speeds up to 40 mile an hour, jumps up to sort of 50, 60 foot. It can be quite scary, but you hang there for quite a long time, so you've got time to plan your landing. But it's just being out on the sea. You don't need a motorboat or anything to pull you along. You're just using the power of the wind. No pollution involved. There's a big fraternity now of surfers and kitesters up here, and it's growing. It's a little sort of oasis amongst sort of industrial Teesside.
In the last few miles of this journey, the coast changes again, leaving the heavy industry behind and moving back to nature. From Saltburn by the sea, almost through to the end of this leg, spectacular Jurassic cliffs mark where the North Yorkshire moors meet the sea. And it's at Whitby where this leg of my journey ends. These massive whale jawbones recall the fact that Whitby was once one of the country's most important whaling ports. Today, that's not something that many might want to celebrate. Nevertheless, like Dracula, Captain Cook, and the spectacular Gothic Abbey, it'll be forever part of Whitby's amazing history. As I've travelled these last 120 miles down the northeast of England, what struck me, even above the natural beauty of much of this coast, is how many really significant events have happened here. And strangely, how many of them have faded from our collective memory. The wars that shaped the United Kingdom, and the violent riots that changed it. The first ever human settlement on our shores. And even the world-beating industrial heritage seem largely forgotten outside this part of the country. Perhaps the reason is that Britain started to look in the other direction. As the horizons broadened beyond Europe towards America, it was the west coast that was best placed to open up the new world. But don't dismiss the east coast yet. The next leg of this journey takes us from Robin Hood's Bay to the Wash, a coast of innovation. It's the home of Britain's oldest seagoing boats and one of the nation's favourite comfort foods. It's the birthplace of our chemical industry. It's also where the British seaside holiday was invented. I've had my eyes opened wide by the northeast coast of England. Once visited, never forgotten. And I'll tell you what, these chips are the best I've tasted on the entire journey.